I guess the next topic I would pick your brain about kind of dives back to, you said you got your job in Alabama. You were talking about your philosophies of sound and this and that. And obviously, you spent a wealth of time developing yourself, not only as a marching percussionist, but just as a marimba soloist, like a music literature, whatever you want to call it, concert percussionist. You were principal percussion for a few different ensembles. I saw one in Alabama and then a few others. So what was it about your philosophy that sold it to her? Like, take us through that. Are you a sound over a feel type of person? Are you this, what is it?
I definitely am, and maybe to a fault at sometimes, but my perception of my own training, and for correctness or not, is that it was always about the sound. And so what I can remember, like I have this like distinct perception that I never had a true marimba lesson until I studied with Kevin Bobo. That was the first time I really received like a technical comment that made me think about the way I was moving. And I'm not saying like that is the right or wrong way. It's just like that was my experience. It was always about the sound we were trying to make. And for me, I think that is the direct way to the path. I think both ways work. You can talk about how it should feel and it will result in a sound. But the thing that I think bothers me is when you talk about the feel and sometimes forget to emphasize that you want it to feel that way is because it will sound. And ultimately, people developed a technique because they knew it created that sound. And so I'm a big proponent of like talking about the sound you want and letting your hands adjust to make the sound versus thinking about how it should feel. And then whatever sound results is just like an after effect of that, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. I think that ensembles in the modern era of marching percussion are starting to trend more in that direction. Yeah. Especially if you compare now 2020, 2021 to like 1990, yeah. There's kind of been I don't want to say an all out abandonment, but a less strict height system.
Yeah.
That I think is a wonderful evolution of the activity that has just allowed for a more balanced ensemble across the board. When right. Not just talking about snares, not just talking about quads, but you're talking about percussion ensemble, horn ensemble, like full package, strictly speaking, in like a marching band activity. Just because you're allowing people to use their ears more and thinking less about geometry.
Well, that's the whole thing. You know, I'm not saying the height system is right or wrong. I'm just saying that, like, for me, forte in one context is not the same in another, and I think it limits you to a specific. And it's like you said, like I will make the example to students that like I can play 12 inches and have two completely different sounds, and if you're totally relying on just how it feels, there's never a right or a wrong. And so I tell my students that all the time, like there's not a right or wrong sound. It's just, are we matching? Are we playing the same sound? Because sometimes you're going to need like a heavier sound or maybe a more articulate sound, and sometimes you want a lighter sound, or maybe you want like a thinner sound for like a really soft moment. It just depends on the context. And so again, I think that it's just a more direct route to understanding by talking about the sound. And so and that's not to say like that I won't talk about like how it moves and stuff. Like there's definitely times where that needs to come into play, but I'm just like wary of getting too into, okay, think about it rotating more here versus like we're trying to put more of an accent on this note and whatnot like that.
Well, you not only have the musical context, you have the anatomical differences between each person. Like people's hands are different sizes, your arms are different sizes and weights, and what gets the forte sound you want in one context for one person might be a little different for the person standing next to them. And at the end of the day, what matters, you're judging a marching show or whatever, or any ensemble, you're not right up in front of them. You're not really going to notice if this snare drummer or this marimba player is playing a little bit higher or using a slightly different technique, as long as the sound blends and it all sounds the way you want it to sound. So that evolution, just piggyback off what you guys have been talking about, has been incredible, I think, because that way you avoid snare drummers that have their drum up to their nipple. Like,
right, you kind of match the heights.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah. Although I would argue some judges use it as a scapegoat to slot groups.
Maybe.
There's that.
I'm like, I could go on and on about that because I'll be honest, like like obviously we get our trooper tapes, but maybe I have friends at other drum corps that are placing, first, second, and I'm also able to hear their tapes. And the type of commentary that's happening is so interesting to me about how it's so much more focused on like fundamental, like just how they're moving and whatnot versus like, it's just different. And I can't tell you how like disappointed I am when I hear like, yeah, marimba 3 is just not rotating the same. I'm like, can you please talk about the sound? Are you saying that it's not blending? And I really wish to see the judging community as a whole. I'm not saying all of them, but I wish there was more of a focus on, again, the result we're looking for versus like the means to get the result. Meaning like they're talking about the technique because what I'm assuming is they're saying it's not blended. But rather than talking about the technique not looking the same, please talk about the sound is not the same, if that's what you mean. And that is something that I would love to see happen over the next few years. Like as the teaching side of things becomes more focused on that, I would hope that that's reflected in the judge. And I 100% will tell you that the amount of times I get comments just about like the technique, and maybe this makes me sound full of myself a little bit, but it's like I teach 4 mallets to college students, you know what I mean? And like,
no, I'm 100% on board. I, over the years, have developed a lot of relationships in the activity with people who are fortunate enough to get gigs in caption head jobs with many different groups. So I've kind of gobbled up a black market of drum tapes, as you will, that I keep in a Dropbox folder. And I think it's funny the nuance that's given to some groups versus the nitpicking that's given to other groups. A friend of mine he was a caption head at a group striving to make finals for a few years, getting their balls busted for like some tap 5s that sounded pretty good, but they're just like nitpicking this and that. And then you listen to another group who's competing for a gold medal that you're like, man, they're really like giving those comments with a grain of salt right now. So
yeah,
I think judging transparency needs to be boosted significantly.
I would love to see tapes released, which and I say that
they used to put them on the DVDs.
I know, I get it. Judging is it's a thankless job, right? Like that's such pressure to get it right. And
I don't envy it at all.
Yeah, no, it doesn't matter which side you're on, you're gonna get attacked. But like at the same time, like I think just by releasing the tapes, it would be a much more transparent situation. And again, I would love to see the level of comments not be based on the course ranking. And maybe I'm just assuming it's that way, but there are tapes on YouTube too. That like you can hear, and it's like so frustrating to me to hear a group maybe challenge on some just like notes, like straight up like the notes are not the same. Yeah, we're getting comments about like, they didn't rotate the same.
I mean, I think that there are levels of it that obviously I just said I don't envy it, but I do think that the activity, in order to push forward like the level of training for the judges, has to amplify too. And I think that I know a lot of judges that would agree with that, just because they have to keep up with the evolution of the activity. I mean, we're over here talking about groups playing stuff now that are finishing in like 14th, 15th place that like I didn't play as a second place finisher. When Mike and I went to DCI finals a couple years ago, I think scouts were in 15th place, and I'm sitting there watching them. I was like, is this a 15th place drumline? Like, what is going on?
Our minds were blown.
And just with the addition of like electronics and like the level of like layering and the arrangements and the addition of like body and the environmental demand, like, is this group doing something that's hard? Like, do judges from 50 years ago know that it's hard, or do they know the difference between somebody who's just simply doing a plie or the Blue Devils are moonwalking while they're playing a snare break? Like,
no,
so,
I think there's judges like Mike Leikski who have like really taken the steps to educate themselves as much as they can on what is happening and be able to speak thoroughly about every aspect of it. And then there are other judges that, like, it's just not in their wheelhouse, and it's not their fault necessarily, but it's the lack of money. Like, there's not money to provide those things, like from my impression, at least. Versus like
certainly not right now.
Yeah, definitely not right now. But yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, there would be, yearly training, and, I think in an ideal world, in my opinion, there would be more percussion judges, and that's coming from percussionists, but I would love to see there be more detailed, maybe like a percussion ensemble on, go back to the PE1, PE2, but
I think that would be incredible. I'm 100% in support of that.
Yeah,
Box judge, field judge, everybody wins.
Yeah,
dude, even if they wanted to keep it somewhat similar to what it is, like P1 has like limits on what they can access to the field, which I don't agree with, but whatever. If they want to keep that, fine. But like P2 should sit. Let's edit that out. Should sit about like 10 rows back and just watch the front ensemble the whole time. I mean, you're going to be able to hear the whole ensemble.
Yeah. I think for better or worse, I found with the first year of the new limits on where they could go in the field, we definitely got way more comments about the front ensemble than any other year. So, I mean, in that sense, that was a positive thing, but I don't want it to be, you have to pick one or the other. I just wish there was a way. I mean, there is a way just
to evaluate all of it.
All of it, yeah. Exactly.
Obviously, it's a money game, but I understand. Yeah.
My vote. Let's take the music 2 or whatever it was this last year, and let's just move it back to PE2.
Yeah.
Yep.
Let's do it.
Yeah. I'm on board.
Excited.
DCI, we know you're listening. Make it happen.
They're not listening.
I know.
Maybe. We'll see. I'm not going to be that vain, but we'll see.